Hello.
Hello. Hi everyone. We have a special guest today from US and her name is Smiti. Hello Smiti.
Hi, everyone.
Can you please introduce yourself and tell us more about your YouTube channel?
Sure. So my name is Smiti Nathan, and I'm an archaeologist by training, and I've had a bunch of different jobs throughout my career. But for the most part, I've always been an archaeologist for almost 17, 18 years now. And in starting my YouTube journey, I wanted to make free archaeology educational content to help people understand kind of what it's like to be an archaeologist, some of the things we study, some of the questions we ask, and just, kind of what we do in our lives for fun too. So in my channel, I also do a bit of booktube because I really love reading, a little bit of travel. Yeah, so that's a bit about what I'm doing with my channel and why I started.
Okay, and as an archaeologist, it's my first time speaking to an archaeologist actually. So and I've looked at your videos, it's quite interesting. And one of the videos that caught my attention is the trip that you went to Oman.
Mhm.
Can you please explain more about your field trip, your things that you do there, Oman, and the experiences?
Sure. So I'll start with a bit about what we do as archaeologists. And there's a whole variety of ways to do archaeology. A lot of people usually think digging and excavation, and that is one way to do it. And I've done it for years before too. But there are other ways we can do archaeology that also entail field work. That could be what's called archaeological survey, which is one of my specialties. And that's basically walking around a landscape or an area and looking for archaeological artifacts, mainly archaeological sites. So sometimes archaeological survey is what you do before you start excavating because you want to find the site and then you can excavate the site. There are other types of archaeological field work that we do. For example, like laboratory analysis. So that means that if there are specific types of finds that we are finding at a site, we'll bring out specialists to collect and study them. So a quick example of that is I have a background in what's called archaeobotany. So that's ancient plant analysis. And there's a special way to try to extract certain types of plant remains from soil or other types of objects and things like that. So often, if you bring an archaeobotanist to the field, they will be collecting a lot of dirt and basically
Mhm.
inundating it with water. So putting it in water and hopefully uh, burnt seeds will float to the top of this like water that you pour in, and we can capture them and then hopefully export them and study them. So that was a very short and probably not comprehensive explanation of what type of analyses that we can do and why we might bring a specialist to the field, because there are specific ways that we need to collect this data and information and handle these remains and export them. Probably a better example of that is like bones. So if we
Mhm.
find a bunch of animal bones at a site, we'll bring out what's called a zooarchaeologist, and they'll look through the animal remains and it's usually bones, and they might need to export them. That means ask the country permission for those objects to be taken out and then hopefully returned when we're done studying them, or they might study them in the country because customs usually raises a question if you try to bring bones into a country. They're like, who are you? They even do that with dirt. So yeah, so there's all these different types of team members that we have on an archaeological team, and they all are archaeologists and they're just doing different things. And a big component of one of the aspects of my work in Oman, especially what I contribute to my team, is this aspect of community archaeology. Oftentimes, we go to different countries, and local communities are living day by day next to these sites or alongside them or with these artifacts as well. And we want to make sure we're not only respectful to the people who are living there, but also making sure that they're engaged in a way they want to be with the research. Sometimes that's full-time collaborators. There's local archaeologists that we bring in as part of our team, and we work with them directly. Other times it's talking to community leaders to make sure that the community is comfortable and informed and engaged with what we're doing. And in Oman specifically, I've been working there for almost 10 years now. I can't believe it's been a decade. And I've worked in the same general area that whole time. And a big part of my job this past season was to support students who are beginning their doctoral research in Oman, or even doing bachelor's level or master's level research. These are very smart individuals and students. And my role was really just to support them, make sure they had the community connections they needed, if they had any questions about the methodologies they were using, or just needed an extra hand to hold a poll. Like, I was really there to help this season. I had some of my own little research goals, but it was mainly wrapping up some research that I had started before the pandemic hit. So, yeah, so oftentimes we find that as you move up in age and hopefully wisdom on archaeological projects, you're still doing, of course, your own research, but a big part of the team I'm on is making sure we're mentoring and fostering the next generation of archaeologists as well, both local archaeologists, international archaeologists, and community members who are interested in archaeology.
All right. And just now you mentioned like bones, like one of the examples is bone. Like how do you actually identify the age of the bone? Like if I'm not mistaken, like radioactive or something like that?
Yeah, so there's different ways we can date materials that are bones. So I think it just depends what part of the bone you're finding. So, there's two types of general dating in archaeology. There's what's called
Mhm.
absolute dating and relative dating. Now, absolute dating is, I think, the dating you're thinking about. Like, so, you take a piece of an object, you send it to a laboratory, they do either some type of analyses, and then you come out with this date from like the
Yeah.
and it's usually a date range, and depending on the type of analysis, it's based on certain curves and more complicated analyses than I have time to get into now. But you do get an exact date range. Now, you do have to take these with a grain of salt sometimes, because these date ranges and these curves are, based on very intricate analyses, but those are often changing too. So we might learn something about the Earth's formation or a certain event, and then we have to recalibrate the curves, if you've heard that before. So if you've been reading certain books and they're like, oh, we have this date, but then we had to redate it, that's why. That's one possibility as to why.
Mm.
So with bones, you can do absolute dating. It's also interesting with bones, like if you get teeth, you can sometimes extract like DNA or certain types of DNA to learn more about that as well. Now, let's say the you just get a bunch of scattered bones, and it's or very small bones, and you can't really, for whatever reason, do absolute dating. There's what's called relative dating, and relative dating has to do with what's called archaeological stratigraphy. So usually we think of like the law of superposition, which means that objects that are found under something are usually older than the objects
Mhm.
above. So if I found this Yeti, but then I found this can, I would think this can here is younger, and then this Yeti is older.
Mm.
Now, there's of course events and things that happen that we have to take into account. Like if someone digs a hole, that kind of ruins all these nice layers.
Mm.
But that's something we're taught and trained in, to identify those things when we're excavating. So if we come across some bones and for whatever reason we can't do absolute dating, we can think about relative dating and think about, okay, how old are the objects above this bone that we found, and how old are the objects below this bone? We can also, and that might give us a date range to start working with. So there's a number of ways to try to triangulate the dates of bones. So
Oh, okay. Because like in Indonesia, there's one island called Java. It hosts like a Homo. Now it's Homo sapien. Like many thousand years ago, it's called Homo erectus.
Okay.
So Indonesia, yeah. So Indonesia is like hosts like 50% of the Homo erectus.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now about Neanderthals, which is not Homo erectus, I'm very aware. Because I actually don't know as much about fossilized human remains and
Hmm.
our human ancestors, so that's a knowledge area that I'd love to learn about. And Indonesia does pop up frequently, so that's like wonderful to see and hear. And so, just as a quick note, archaeologists, sometimes we often have to specialize in a certain area, and we're really studying the whole human past, so it takes a long time to even learn like 10% of the field. So I'm often telling people that, like, oh, okay, that's really interesting, but like I need to do a bit more research on that area too. And I often get that on excavations, like my specialty is like computers and archaeology and a bit of ancient plants and archaeology. And sometimes people will come up and be like, "What's this rock?" And I'm like, "I really don't know, but I can like help you look it up." So yeah, that's a bit of a challenge sometimes, because there's so much to our past human history to learn about. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
true. And then watched one of your video also concerning archaeologists. Like archaeologists is like study of like human system, the structures in the society. Like maybe you can tell us more about that. It applies on our workforce.
Yeah. So we study the past. Like we study people in the past, and that could be the social systems they're part of, that could be the objects they use, that could be the lives they're living, the communities they part of. We really study or we try to study every aspect of the past, and we do so typically through material culture, which means like artifacts, things people use. But there are archaeologists who are studying like complementary things, so like the environment that people possibly could have lived in the past. So when we're thinking about the modern workforce, and let's say an archaeologist wants to leave academia or the academic professorial path, or they're forced out to, is the more likely thing because there's very few jobs. uh, Oftentimes people might think that, like, okay, well, you guys just dig in holes all the time, like you don't have skills like outside of that. But we actually have a lot of skills that can translate really well to things that companies are looking for and desiring. But with any type of profession, or anytime you switch an organization, you need to be onboarded and trained. But sometimes organizations think the training gap is going to be so large for an archaeologist. And I think the video you're referring to is the one I made about how the skills that archaeologists bring to user experience research. And, a lot of us are in the US, especially when we're archaeologists, we're actually trained in anthropology departments. And anthropology is the study of people, usually like living people. Like people think of that as cultural anthropology. And sometimes that's just called anthropology. And there so I can do the breakdown of the fields of anthropology if you're interested in. But oftentimes people, when they're hiring, might forget that archaeologists are also anthropologically trained, and anthropology is a very desired field in user experience research. So that was just like one example to kind of signal to people who might be hiring user experience researchers that are like, oh, well, we want anthropologists. It's like, hey, well, we're trained in anthropology too, and then we have these other skills. And also to try to show to archaeologists that, hey, there are things you learn that don't just apply to working in archaeology. They can apply to other fields, like user experience research. But it's always fun to meet archaeologists who are working in really diverse places. I have a friend who's working on diversity, equity, and inclusive measures for a state government in the United States, and she's archaeologically trained. I have a friend who's working as like a researcher for an educational think tank and company. Um, I have friends who are working in the geographic information systems industry because of the mapping and computer experience they gained while in archaeology. And of course, I have archaeology friends working in user experience research as well. So it's quite wide ranging, and we kind of joke when we talk about it, like, oh, who knew? Like when we were trying to manage our dissertation committee or dealing with, or communicating with government officials, that would actually translate into the jobs that we have now. So, yeah.
Okay. And for your information, me and Smiti
Mm.
went through a part-time YouTuber Academy by Ali. So what Ali says that don't be an architect, be an archaeologist.
Yes, poster child of PTYA here.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, we have to find things slowly, digging things, yeah, and then we find our true, what do you call, we have lots of videos coming up instead of like we overthink things, and we want to do videos, but we overthink, but in the end we do nothing. But as an archaeologist, we do things bit by bit. Yeah. So do it now, get perfect later.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So what's your take on this Ali's word?
Yeah, so when I was watching Ollie's YouTube for beginners, and that's when I first saw this idea of an archaeologist, I was like, "Oh, hey, that's me." Like, good to know. And on one hand, like archaeologists do, we do take a slight architectural approach in the beginning because the science of archaeology, especially when you're digging something, it's destructive. Like once you dig something, you can't put it back. It's like, okay, I can put the dirt back, but then you lose all this information about like the context. So in that sense, I would say we take a slight architectural approach in the beginning because we want to be careful and intentional about what we're digging. But then when the true archaeologist comes in, it's like, okay, well, we can't overthink it too much or we'll never get any work done. And usually
Mm.
when you're out in the field, you're out there for a limited amount of time. So there's a little bit of the architect where you want to plan as much as possible, but then you really have to do it. You can't just sit around like, oh, I'm thinking about digging this hole and it's been 3 weeks, and oh, I have to leave in like 2 weeks. So that's not going to really work. So I will say, in terms of archaeological methodology, where I think the metaphor beautifully holds up is when you do archaeological survey, you're looking around and you're thinking like, hey, what could be an archaeological site? And I think that's what people are doing when they are thinking about like, hey, like what could I make a YouTube channel about? So then they're like, okay, I found these 3 areas that I think could be archaeological sites. And so then the YouTuber would think, okay, these 3 areas could work. Then you do a little bit of background research to be like, okay, is this like a market fit? And the archaeologist like, hey, is this something? Is it worth digging? And then, there's only so much background research that you can do. You can do other analyses, of course, and that's a whole other type of archaeology that I don't think, but I think the spirit of Ollie's metaphor is really about digging. So then you go for it, and then you start digging slowly by slowly. You don't kind of blow up the site. You go like layer
Mess up
by layer.
everything.
Yeah, so each layer you're digging, I would say, is like making a video and seeing what works. And then, like, maybe you find something immediately, like an artifact, and you're like, oh, wow, because you're going viral or like you're getting a lot of views. Hey, that's working. But then there's also other types of data sets that, hey, you dig up a bit of dirt and then you send it to the lab to analysis. And then months later, you're like, whoa, this is a discovery. And those could be like those searchable videos that are like, I made this, it did okay. And then all of a sudden, months later, it's blowing up. And the core of the metaphor is that like you need to do something. You can do some research, you can, find some spots that you want to try out, but the key thing is to try and to do it consistently. And of course, when you're excavating, like you're recording as you go. So I think almost the problem with beginners is like we over analyze our analytics. It's like, oh, I
Yeah.
have like 2 videos and it's a 2 out of 2. It's like, okay, great. Like it's 2 videos, like awesome. um, but to do it consistently is really important so you don't lose that muscle of learning how to dig. And some of the things, the discoveries that you'll make about yourself or what might resonate with an audience might come down later down the line, but it's really about like being intentional and consistent. And then the other part of the metaphor would be that when we go out and do these things to do it efficiently, we want to systematize it. We want to systematize our recording. We want to systematize like getting our tools together and going to the field. So putting systems in place, of course, makes that workflow a lot easier. So yeah, I think Ollie's metaphor really holds up when it comes to the excavation side of archaeology. And maybe it could hold up with other aspects, but I think when most people think archaeologists, they might be thinking like, oh, that person digging. And so in that sense, I think the metaphor holds up quite well. And I was like, oh, okay. I felt like it was really tailored to me. So I got my money's
So, as an archaeologist, what is your most fulfilling aspect in your job?
worth. I think it changes with kind of every season of life that I'm in. When I was a PhD student, I was really proud of the fact that I won my own grant. So someone else paid me to do some research. And as part of that grant, I could kind of start to create the vision of archaeology that I wanted to see. So I was really proud that I was able to involve local Omani women in the design and execution of my project. Um, and that was really important to me, and I could pay them like that felt so incredibly good. And it was like, oh, this is right. I feel like I'm doing archaeology like in a way that I feel like I want that would be my vision of archaeology. And then like in this phase of life, I really am interested and excited about archaeology education. I still do, intensive scientific research. I can't do that 24/7. It doesn't give me energy. But it's important and it keeps my brain kind of nimble. And I love engaging with the team I work with on it. But if when I was thinking about like, well, I'm a certified designing your life coach, and I don't do like coaching, but as part of that program, based on the book off of like Dave Evans and Bill Burnett, Designing Your Life, one question we often ask ourselves to kind of brainstorm is like, what would you do if money and prestige wasn't an issue? And honestly, as an immigrant child, that is very hard, like to like let go of. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I want to make money and it would be okay. And I want to make my family proud and those things. And those are still important, of course, but just freeing my mind to think about like, okay, how do I want to do archaeology? If, it didn't matter if I was a professor or, if I got funding or if I made money for myself, like what would be my dream vision of doing archaeology? And I think in this stage, it's really supporting the next generation of archaeologists and then contributing to the field by doing archaeology education. So I'm still kind of figuring out what that might look like, but YouTube was a really enticing way to do that because one, I hate charging people. Like I really don't like it. Like I'm like, especially people of like historically marginalized populations or people who might be vulnerable, or honestly, if you're broke, like, it's really just like, there's so many types of people want to be archaeologists, and like there's a bit of a bottleneck on like who gets through, and it's not always it doesn't always have to do with intelligence, it's sometimes access to resources and privilege. So
Yeah.
I wanted to create like free resources, but I also wanted to like sustain myself, and that usually is like making
Yeah,
money in some
true.
way. So YouTube was really attractive because I'm like, hey, I could put out this free content there, and then I could monetize that somehow. And that how to monetize that and how to think about it as a business, that's where Ollie's course came in really handy for me because it saves so much time, energy, googling, watching random YouTube videos like, okay, this person just gave all this advice, like what if it is true? So I don't know exactly how I'm going to make money off of like free educational archaeology content. I've given myself 2 years to figure it out with the savings that I have. But in true archaeologist fashion, I'm just, you know, going at it slowly and consistently and trying to see what resonates with my audience, but also what I really enjoy making as well.
Okay, and I see that you have a section in your YouTube channel, BookTube. Like
Mhm.
maybe you can explain more on that.
Yeah, so archaeologists are humans too. We all have a wide variety of interests. It's not like most of us don't just love like digging in a hole or doing field work. We have lives and we like other things. And I found that one of the aspects of YouTube that I love watching, in addition to tiny home videos, was booktube videos. So videos about books. And in creating my channel, even though I want to make sure I have a focus so people aren't confused, and so a large chunk of my content, of course, is going to be archaeology, but I wanted to almost take a variety show approach. And I think it was John Uche who had mentioned that in analyzing James Corden's program, but not too much variety because I need to have a focus. So that video actually inspired me to be like, hey, like you don't have to just have a booktube channel. You can have a booktube playlist and make videos about books. And the archaeology aspect, it always creeps in. Like, it's very hard for me to read a book and not think about it as an archaeologist sometimes. Like, for example, I mean, this is a very easy one. Like, I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and there's just so many parallels. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, she's a woman and she was doing academia and then plants. I studied ancient plants, and I'm always thinking, like, oh, I wonder if that would preserve in the archaeological record, or like how I would interpret that. And that also happens like when I read fiction, like if there's anything, like if there's concepts or things that happen. So I have sipped the archaeology Kool-Aid, as they say in America. I am very much in the cult of archaeology. So I didn't think it would detract too much from my brand because when I'm explaining why I might like a book or why it didn't resonate with me, or if I'm analyzing some of the science that they might bring out, it always goes back to my archaeology training. So, in that respect, like I think it does stay on brand because it's, almost like an archaeologist reacts to this book. But yeah, so that's why I started the booktube aspect. Because I do read a decent amount. I'm not a crazy reader. I don't finish like 40 books in a month. It's usually like,
There's a lot.
yeah, and there are people who do it, and that's amazing, and I love their content. But I was just like, I have this joy and love of books, and I would love to share that on my YouTube channel. So that's why I started that booktube kind of playlist. So I like to say I'm like a part-time booktuber. So it's not a full-time booktube channel. So
Like a month, how many books that you read
it varies. I would
on
say
average?
like 3 to 4 books a month.
Okay.
Like
Like once a week? One book a week?
yeah, sometimes. For the
Okay.
past 2 weeks, no. Like, we've been very sick in our house, so I have not been reading books. And I'm actually making a video on this too, but I read in a variety of ways. I listen to audiobooks. So if I'm,
Mm.
driving, I like to have an audiobook on. I prefer that personally to music or podcasts. no shade to those things, like, they're great. I really like audiobooks, and I also read on my Kindle sometimes, like, often too. And often what I'll do, even if I have, like, one book, I might sometimes start it as an audiobook, then pick it up as, like, an ebook, and then I'm like, "Oh, I actually wanna see this book," and then I might buy it. So sometimes I, like, go through, like, the whole loop of physical book, audiobook, ebook. So it depends, and I just always try to have a book on me. I'm usually reading 2 to 3 books at one time, usually an audiobook, something on either an ebook or a physical book, and then I have like a longer book that I'm like slowly chipping away at. But I try not to read more than 3 books at one time because then it feels like really overwhelming and I don't do anything. But the other reason I sometimes have to read multiple books at once is because I use a free app called Libby, and that's a popular app in the US, and also around the world a bit, where you can use your library card to check out ebooks. And there's usually a time
Mm.
limit. So sometimes you might only have a book for a week or 3 weeks. And for some of those longer books, I need more time. So then I have to wait to get the book back. So that's another reason. If I checked out a book and I didn't finish it in time, I have to return it online and then just wait for it to come back. So that's another reason I might have books, like so many books on my, like, I'm currently reading. It's not that I'm a genius. It's like, no, my like library loan lapsed and I'm just waiting to get it back. So yeah.
So, do you plan to publish a book like in the future?
Have you been talking to my husband? Because
He
he's
asked
always
that to
like,
you.
yeah, he's always like, "You're gonna write a book, right?" Like, that's, like, the next stage of it. And you know what? I think that would be really cool, but I really wanna I really want it to be a book that I'm excited about, that I think people would read, that I'm just really, so excited to bring to the world, because in my culture growing up, like, there's almost a sacredness to books. So I'm just like, oh, I just want it to be good. So for me, I probably won't write an academic book. Like, I just think it's too much time and way too little money, if any. So not a good business decision. But I would love to write a book. I just don't know what it would be. Like, I don't know if it would be nonfiction, maybe it could be fiction. I have no idea. And you know what? I hope in creating YouTube videos that I get some more data points to maybe figure out what a book might look like, or what someone might be interested in reading from me. So I'm really watching kind of Ollie's journey in writing a book. I follow some other booktubers who are authors that are in the midst of their writing process. I've even bought some books on like writing workshops and like thinking about writing. So I mean, we all write, as YouTubers, we often
Yeah.
script things, even if it's just bullet points. So yeah, I would love to one day, but I am still kind of searching for what that topic could be that like is something I feel I could deliver something of value to whoever's reading it. So.
Okay. Because I'm in the midst of the writing a book as well. Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. It happens like during COVID, like I joined this class writing a non-fiction book, so I'm
That's
still
amazing.
writing. So I'm using this YouTube channel as my platform,
I love
like
that.
to
Are you
promote my
ready?
book. Yeah.
Have you announced what the book is about?
No, not yet. It's
Okay.
on non-fiction. It's a non-fiction book.
Well, I am wishing you the best of luck and courage and strength and energy. I think that's
Mm.
amazing. And I really loved what you said about that you joined a class. That really resonated with me because that was something I was thinking about as well. It's like, okay, once I get in a rhythm of YouTube, maybe that's the next goal, is to join a writing class, because there's always so much to learn about the craft of writing. And
Yeah.
I think that's so wonderful and very validating personally to hear. So sign me up when you have, like, pre-orders for your book. I will be right
Okay.
there. I think it's wonderful. I love reading books by people who I've met in some way. So that's amazing. I'm so happy for you.
Writing a book is like doing a video. The more video you do, the more writing that you do, the better it will become. Something like that.
Yeah, I could totally see that. That's awesome. Are you feeling more confident as you're, writing more chapters now?
Yes, the more I write, I become better and better. And obviously, I have to read more books. The more books I read, I need to. If I want to write, I need to write.
Yeah.
I have to read more books.
Yeah, it's wonderful to get inspiration from other people's
Yeah.
style and just see how they've done things. So, even though I'm not a book writer, I tell people I'm like I wouldn't recommend doing something you're not interested in consuming. So if you don't like to read books, like maybe like rethink like writing one because but it can be done, of course. Like there are ghostwriters and things like that. But I think it's wonderful that like you seem like really immersed in this world of being an author. So
Yeah, but writer, yeah, you have ghost writer, but it doesn't resonate with your personality.
I don't think it would work for me.
Yeah.
I've been so when I do research for videos, sometimes I go in a rabbit hole. So I went in a rabbit hole about like celebrity ghostwriters, and it was really interesting. Um, because there are very skilled ghost writers who are who help celebrities write their memoirs and their stories. And celebrity memoirs is not typically a genre that I read myself
Yeah,
because
yeah, same.
yeah, because I'm like, well, I want, but in stepping back and trying to open my mind, I'm like, okay, like, maybe they have really interesting stories to tell and they just don't have the time, or maybe they don't feel like they have the skill to commit to learning the craft of writing or developing that. And I think as I was doing my research, I think the thing that resonate like the thing that I realized about myself is the transparency aspect. Like I don't like if someone is saying like I wrote this book and then it comes out that you had a ghostwriter. I almost feel like it's better to say, and I think a lot of people agree, some might disagree, some might not care, but that fine, have a ghostwriter, but make sure they're like, a visible co-author. I think that I'm fine. It's like if I don't want to name any names and get sued, but like if a celebrity um, said like, "Hey, I'm writing this book about my life, and like this person is helping me with my journey, like my writing process, and me help not even the writing process, me getting that story out there, and it's just very transparent and clear." That resonates with me. I think Trevor Noah like was quite transparent about that, if I'm remembering right. If not, sorry, Trevor, don't sue me. But that is something I resonate with more. But it's still hard. Like I mean, I try to read broadly, so I'm really trying to search for like a celebrity memoir that was actually written by the celebrity itself. So yeah, I think the transparency part is what kind of is the hesitancy about the genre. But I think the fact that people are telling their stories in book form with the help of others, like I don't, that's totally fine. But it's the transparency aspect for me. That got really far away from archaeology. But yeah.
Okay, maybe we wrap things up. Like, what is the take-home message that you would like to bring to the audience?
Um, Oof. I That's a really good question.
Yeah.
When if you're okay, maybe two. Let's just do two. If you're
All right.
interested in YouTube in general, I don't think like just go for it. Like you can do it in a very low cost way. Flip out your camera. Ollie has free resources on that. I can attest to that. It works. Like just do it. It is a lot of hard work, but it's like very rewarding. You learn a lot about yourself, storytelling. And even if you don't want to do it anymore, you have this whole portfolio of videos that you did, and those skills can translate elsewhere. if you happen to be an archaeologist and you're watching this video, or you're learning about archaeology or anthropology and you want to make archaeology content, I say go for it. There are really not many archaeologists on YouTube. It's a bit of a lonely
I
space
agree. I
sometimes.
agree.
It's a bit of a lonely space, and I just want to empathize with like how daunting it might feel. Like I struggle with that. I'm in a bit of a rut in terms of archaeology videos because I have all these ideas, but they're going to take a lot of time and research. So, um I empathize if you're like, oh my gosh, this feels like a lot, but just start small, start digestible, start with like what you know. And even if you don't know and you're starting out in archaeology, like share your learning process with us, like if you're like learning about something, document that. There are like so many voices and perspectives that YouTube doesn't have about archaeologists. Like, I would love to see more minority archaeologists on this platform. I would love to see archaeologists in general. I would like to see, older archaeologists, younger archaeologists, people doing maybe people who don't even dig at all, who have a specialty that is not excavation. It would just be lovely to see more people and like build that community. And for the archaeologists who are on YouTube, thank you. You've given me a lot of videos and information to see like your journey, and you've set up a really great foundation for people who are interested in pursuing YouTube as an archaeologist. So just a big thank you to the archaeologists who were also there before me. So
Okay, if you want more information, check out the link below in the description box on Smiti as an archaeologist. So Smiti, I'm very appreciative of your time. Thank you so much
well, thank you for
talking
having
to
me.
you. Yeah,
Yeah, and I'll be on the lookout for your book.
yeah,
So
thank you.
no
See you next
problem.
time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.